Okay, folks, we are looking at our summer 2021 coordinated sciences, and this is paper 6.1, and we're looking at question 5. And I'm really glad that we're looking at this question 5 because it's one of those questions that comes up every now and again, a planning question. This could be in your biology, your chemistry, or your physics, and this time it happens to be in the physics. Now, students don't like these because it involves a bit of writing. Okay, we have a look at the questions answer sheet. You are basically given a big space to write in. However, hopefully, as we'll see, there are some prompts to help you out. As ever, I've got my answer here and I've got the mark scheme next to us, and we're going to kind of talk through how this works. So, first thing, we'll just read the question. We're looking at pure water has a boiling temperature of 100 degrees. When you add salt, it increases, that boiling point increases. Plan an experiment to find out if the amount of salt added is proportional to the increase in boiling temperature. So what we're saying here is, does that the increase in the boiling temperature increase as we increase the amount of salt? The more salt I add, does that make a bigger change in the boiling temperature? Okay, so you're told you can use common laboratory apparatus, and you've got some water and salt. Now here's where we can get some marks. You're asked to include in your plan apparatus, description of a method, a description of measurements, something about variables, and something about how you would get your conclusion. Now in this case, I've labeled this AMT, method. Method is my attempt here to sort of differentiate from measurements, MS, V, variables, and C, conclusion. Now the reason I've done that is because the mark scheme is kind of loosely broken up in that way. Okay, it looks at the apparatus, it looks at the method, it looks at the measurements, it looks at your variables, and then also it looks at your conclusions. And what you're allowed is to take 1 mark from each section. Okay, you should take 1 mark from each section. And then there's kind of a couple more marks because it's a 7-mark question from any section you want. Okay, so you want to have something about the apparatus, something about the method, something about the measurements, variables, and conclusions. Now, you'll notice in my answer, I've circled all the areas where I think I would have got a mark. Okay, so for example, I drew a diagram, I put a lid on a container of water, I put the salt water in there with a heater, which could be a Bunsen burner, and a thermometer in there, or a temperature probe attached to a sensor. And I also said that we could have some scales, a measuring cylinder, a stir, various things like that. Now in these 2 marks, for example, here, I think I've got a mark here for the container and the thermometer, so I've written a little A there. But also there was you could have included this thing about the balance or the scales, and that's this point here. All right, so I'd encourage you to do something similar when you're looking at your answer. Just circle and maybe note down where it is you are getting those marks. Okay, so let's have a look at what I've written now. As I've said in previous ones, you can do this in bullet point form. I like to do it in steps. Okay, and I just like to explain what it is that we have to do. So firstly, we use the scales to measure the mass of a certain amount of salt. And you'll notice here, that's on the method somewhere. Okay, we had water into container. Okay, all right, and add the amount of salt. Okay, use the measuring cylinder to measure a volume of water. The volume is one of the control variables. Okay, so we're going to have to think here about independent variables and dependent variables, but also control variables here, and that's one of our marks down here, which is to keep that amount of water the same every time. We pour the salt into the water. Okay, that's a simple method mark. Okay, which is really important. Okay, and then obviously we use the heater to boil the water. We measure the temperature. Okay, at which the graph becomes constant. In other words, that is the boiling point T. All right, and then for me, I said you should measure the difference T minus 100, as in the amount of the change in the boiling temperature. It doesn't really mention that in the mark scheme here. Okay, I then said to repeat the above at least once. Okay, that's and then calculate an average, which is another process on our variables that we need to be careful with. Change the mass of the salt and repeat the experiment for 5 more values. Now this is a constant thing here in our method marks. 5 amounts. Okay, CIE likes 5, or actually 6 data points, the original one plus 5 more. So always make sure you include a statement to say that you're going to repeat whatever you do for 5 different, in this case, values of mass. It could be anything depending on the experiment you're dealing with. Okay, and then plot a graph. All right, this would be one of our conclusion points of the change in temperature on the y-axis versus the mass of the salt on the x-axis, and look for a pattern in the change in temperature. Okay, now I know I've kind of rushed through this, and you can by all means pause the video and have a look to compare to your answer, but really the point I want to make here is that a lot of the marks are for fairly simple points. Okay, put the water into the container and boil it. Well, somewhere in your answer you must have talked about boiling the water and putting the water in the container. Okay, and that will be a way of getting a very simple mark there. The idea of adding the salt, okay, the idea of doing it a certain number of times, and this is quite a nice one, the idea of using safety goggles, okay, but crucially repeating your measurements so that you can then average a bit later on. Okay, you've got to measure the boiling point of the water and salt. You've got to measure the mass of the salt. These are all fairly simple steps which a good method should cover. Now, if you wanted to, you could just try and write down these titles: method, measurements, control, process, and then processing, and you probably and then an apparatus, and then try and tick off a mark for each of those. Okay, I like doing it in a more natural way, which is writing down a method and also including a little table to show how I would do things. Up to you. It really depends on how much time you have in the exam. Okay, I do hope that if you do a couple of these questions, you realise that it's fairly repeated. Okay, it's quite a common structure that you can do, and actually, hopefully, just by thinking about it a little bit and breaking it down into different sections, you'll see that it's a fairly easy 7 marks for you to get. I'm sure that all of you guys are able to. We'll call it there. If you've got any questions about my method, about the mark scheme, please do let me know. And if you've got a particular question you'd like me to go through, feel free to mention in the comments section, and I'll try and get something sent to you. All right, thanks for watching, guys.